In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please be seated. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all this morning. I found it difficult not to preach on that epistle from James today. But then the more I thought about it, I realized that we don't have a hard time taming our tongues. We're a pretty healthy bunch, right? I mean, we only say things that bless people. We don't say things that curse people here at Christ Church, right? It was hard not to preach on that text. But the gospel today, I think, is it's a significant moment in our Lord's ministry, and it's hard not to take a look at it. I mean, he has reached a turning point in his ministry. We've watched him perform extraordinary miracles. His teaching and preaching has drawn in great crowds. Throngs of people have pressed in to be touched by this life that has come from afar. This life that has obviously come from God. And so folks are trying desperately to press in on him and to learn more about who he is and to try to grab hold of something of what his life can mean for them. Jesus, and he feels that. You can be sure that he feels that. But as his fame and his notoriety grows, you can see him begin to make a shift. He begins to turn toward Jerusalem here in this chapter of Mark's Gospel. This is the first time where Jesus talks about what is going to take place in Jerusalem. He talks about being arrested and being rejected, arrested, killed, and on the third day being raised up. So this is the first time he'll talk about that. And in as much as it's such a significant moment for him in his ministry, in as much as it's a moment of turning toward his ultimate purpose for being, because it really wasn't about the miracles. The miracles are great, and the miracles drew the crowds in, but in Mark's Gospel, he makes it so clear that who Jesus is as Messiah will not be about the miracles as ends in themselves. Who Jesus is as Messiah will find its fullest expression as he hangs there on that hardwood of the cross. That's where his Messiahship will find expression. And so Jesus just pauses for a moment, and he looks at his disciples and he says, "What are people saying about me? Where are they? I mean, who do they say that I am?" Well, some folks think that you're like John the Baptist, or that you're John the Baptist who has come back, or maybe you're Elijah who has returned, right? Even if you're not one of them, folks think that you're like one of those great prophets of old, that you fall in that line, that you are from God in some special or extraordinary way. And so Jesus thinks that all well and good, I'm sure, but then he really turns and looks at them in the eye and says, "Well, that's great, but who do you say that I am?" What a moment, huh? Can you imagine that moment? But who do you say that I am? I mean, what can you say about me today? What does my life mean to your life? What does it mean to your life? What difference do I make in your life? Who am I to you? Who do you say that I am? And Peter, of course, Peter can't help himself. He just can't keep his mouth shut. I just love him. I mean, he's so reckless, isn't he? And he just jumps right out there and he says, "Well, you're the Christ of God. You're the Messiah of God. You're the long-awaited Messiah of God." And it looks like he's gotten it right. He does get it right, but he doesn't get it right. If he'd have just stopped there, it would have all been well and good. But when Jesus starts talking about what awaits him in Jerusalem, Peter doesn't like that part. Peter says, "Wait a minute, you're the Messiah of God, but this other piece about the rejection and the dying and he doesn't even hear about the rising to new life. All he hears is rejection and death in Jerusalem. And so Peter says in the one moment, "You're the Christ," and then Jesus says, "Well, this is what's coming," and Peter says, "No way. Well, I didn't sign up for that." And that's when Jesus has to turn toward Peter and turn against Peter and say, it's almost like Jesus is right back in the wilderness and says, "Get behind me, Satan. Peter, you can't get in the way of my ultimate purpose for being. I can't be the Messiah you want me to be." Boy, isn't that the way we live, though? We want Jesus to be the... If I was to ask you today, who is Jesus to you? Oftentimes my answer and yours is related to what we want or need Jesus to be for me. And that's exactly where Peter is today. That's exactly how he answers. That's exactly what his frustration is that the Jesus is painting is very different from the Jesus that Peter is painting. The two images don't line up, and so as a result, there's this tension in this moment. And it's not just a tension that Peter's having with Jesus, it's one that you and I have, I think, with Jesus every day. We who want Jesus to live into our image of who Jesus should and needs to be for me. Jesus that lines up with what I think and what I want. That's exactly what's going on here in this text today. So I called there's a friend of mine in the parish, a woman who has been in this parish for many, many, many years. And I asked her, I called her at the end of the week and I said, I would really like to talk about the conversation you and I had some time ago. But I wanted you to know, because I know you'll be in church. He's always in church. I knew you'd be in church, and I didn't want to talk about it with you in church. And she says, "Were you going to use my name?" And I said, "No," but I still just didn't want to do it without asking you and saying I wanted to employ the conversation in my sermon. And she said, "If you're not using my name, I'm fine with it." And this past week, I was drawn right back to that conversation that I was having with her. And what makes this so compelling for me this morning is that this is a woman who's been around the church and she and I talked about this. She's been around the church for 80-some years. Probably 85 years, I think. She said she's in her mid-80s. 84, 85 years. And she, what we discovered, one day we were talking, she had called me and said, "Can you come over?" And what we were talking about were end-of-life issues. She wanted to talk about, she's at the end of her life, and so she thinks, in her mind, and so she wants to talk about end-of-life issues. And so we're sitting there talking about these things and celebrating our life and love together. And then she says something really, truly extraordinary. She says, you know what, I don't agree with you about Jesus. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's always something. Why couldn't we just sort of keep moving right along pleasantly together? And she says, I don't agree with you about Jesus. And I said, what don't you agree with me about? And she said, I just think the Son of God part. The Son of God part. And I said, oh. She says, yeah, I think He is a Son of God, but not the way you do. And all along I'm thinking, what do you think I think about the Son of God part? And she says, well, you think that He came from God in a way that He was eternal and came from God. I think He's a Son of God in that God, sort of an adoptionist kind of thing, where God chose Him. He's an extraordinary human being that God chose to work with in an extraordinary way. And she says, it's not quite the same, is it? And she was almost kind of proud about it. And I said, I think we're a little in different places on that, maybe a little bit. And I said, but I don't think that's not so bad, is it? And she says, I don't know. What do you think? You're the priest. And I said, well, I'll have to ponder this a bit. And I was thinking about in the life of the church and the history of the church, and that even in that moment, I was sitting there thinking that people of good faith, when Jesus has asked that question, who do you say that I am? Even if you think back to the creed we're saying this morning, even the creed that we'll say together in a little while, that was created in that 4th century, in the 300s, for 300 years or more after that, and even beyond the councils that created the creeds, clergy, priests and deacons and bishops disagreed about this question of who Jesus is and how exactly He comes from God. And in that moment with her, I realized, why would I think it would be any different today? We're all in lots of maybe different places about this, about who do you say that I am? The important part for me in that moment as I was reflecting on my conversation with her, and as I'm reflecting on my encounter with Jesus this morning and your encounter with Jesus this morning, is not so much what you say, but that you be able to say something about who He is to you. What does His life mean to you? And that's when she said the most extraordinary thing, again, as I'm sort of piecing all this together. What she said that day that was most compelling to me is she said, you know why I love Jesus and why I love His life? Is she said, because there's nothing else in my whole life, there's no story that's ever gotten me out of myself the way His does. I thought, wow, how profound is that? Is that profound or what? I thought, what a gift that is, that she's gotten in touch with the gift of the story, the gift of the life. She is, and she says that. This morning I realized as Jesus is saying to us, Jesus is suggesting to us that at some point you can't just answer the question saying, who am I to you? Well, Jesus, you are the one who does this for me. What this woman was saying is that at some point she made the transition. At some point she made the shift. At some point she began to ask the question, who am I? What can I be for you? What can I be for you? His life began to invite her out of her self-promotion and her self-absorption, which is a horrible place to live, quite honestly. At some point, she heard the invitation. She received an invite, and she responded, and she stepped out. So today, when she hears these words, "Be willing to take up your cross and follow me," she understands that when Jesus is asking the question, He's not just saying, what do I mean to you in kind of a selfish kind of way? Are you in a place to where you're finally getting it? What do I mean to you in terms of the difference your life can make in the world? What do I mean to you in the lives of others? How am I able to employ your life in a way that is transformative, transformational? Or how can I employ your life to make a difference in the lives of others, to even save others, to encourage another today? Oftentimes we'll get spouses will call me. And I realized this as Jesus is asking this question of us today, and as I was reflecting on this conversation with this woman, spouses will oftentimes call me and say, "Hey, would you mind calling my husband or my wife and see if you can get him or her to come to church with me?" Now, you know what I say in those moments? I always say, I'm happy to do that if you ask your spouse if it's okay for me to call him or her. And so, and a lot of the time over the years, I've made those calls. A lot of the time, they'll call back and said, "He said it's fine. He said don't expect much, but it's fine." Or she said the same thing. And I'm comfortable with that. I mean, I'm very comfortable with that. And so I will call and I'll say, "This is Rick over at the church, and I just am calling to talk to you a little bit about the church and see if I can get you to come to church sometime." And oftentimes I realize in that conversation that what people are afraid of is that they're going to have to somehow come into this place and have it figured out in a way that is consistent with what the church thinks or what I might think. In answer to that question, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? So I will, in every conversation like that I have, I will make a point of saying, I don't care if you can't say anything about God. I don't care if you don't have a relationship with God. All I care about is that maybe you come on a Sunday morning and you begin to spend some time together in this place with your family, and then maybe you do it once or twice and then you keep doing it, and I guarantee you I'm right on this, you will reach a place to where Sunday afternoons will become different. Sunday afternoon will be different. The week will become somehow different. And even if you can't verbalize it, at some point, my prayer is that you'll see the face and hear the voice and meet the one who stands on the other side, of this experience. That you'll begin at some point yourself to be able to say something about who He is to you and what His life can mean to you, what His life holds for you. I don't care where you are this morning. All I care about is that you're here. I'm thankful you're here. What I hope is that when you hear Jesus asking, "Who do you say that I am?" I'm hoping that you can say something. That's my hope and my prayer, is that you can say something. But you know what my greater hope and prayer is? Is that you don't settle for that. My greatest hope and prayer is in the coming weeks, months, and years, when I ask you the question again, or when Jesus asks you the question again, you can say something different. You can say something more. And you hear yourself not so much talking about what God can do for me or what Jesus can do for me today, but you're beginning to talk about how God is employing your life to make a difference in the world. That's my hope and my prayer. Because when you begin to move into that place, when you begin to make that transition, that's when you begin to find fulfillment in life. That's when you begin to come to life. That's when you begin to understand this life that had to turn toward Jerusalem and understand what His suffering and what His sacrifice won for us. And when you and I begin to get in touch with that and we begin to absorb that and live that in our own lives, it's amazing what God can do with us and how God can use us to not curse the world with our mouths, but to bless the world. Amen.